There was a time when life on Earth had progressed rapidly and was prosperous. However, this only applied to some. In addition to the increasingly expensive cost of living on Earth, the planet was overpopulated. Then, a company called Homestead offered people a better alternative to living on Earth, namely migrating and building a new colony on a pristine planet called Homestead View. Homestead Company's interstellar airline, the Avalon, took 5,000 passengers and 258 crew members to the second turnover planet, where the journey took 120 years as part of a mass exodus of Earth's population due to ecocide and the collapse of the biosphere. This journey was not accessible. Anyone who wanted a better life could buy a ticket and would be able to go there. Because the trip to the planet was very long, people slept in capsules controlled by a computer system and a whole autopilot. In the middle of the journey, Avalon passed through an area filled with asteroids. Then Avalon crashed into a prominent asteroid in front of her. As a result of the impact, the Avalon experienced a slight disturbance. The computer system detected several malfunctions on the Avalon. However, the computer could immediately overcome them except for one hibernation capsule, which still experienced malfunctions and made the person inside wake up. A man named James Jim Preston woke up. He was greeted by a digital flight attendant who gave him instructions after waking up from hibernation. In addition, each passenger also has an identification bracelet to be able to use the facilities on the aircraft. After waking up, Jim experienced dizziness. The flight attendant said that it was the effect of hibernation and only lasted for a short while. Then he went to his room to clean up. After getting ready, he was asked to gather in a room with other passengers to socialize. But when he went there was no one there. Jim wandered around looking for other passengers, and he found no one but himself. Jim then asked the information center where the captain was. He was told to go to the navigation counter if he wanted to see him. Since he didn't have access, he couldn't open the door, and there didn't seem to be any signs of life in the room. Eventually, Jim entered an observatory room, and the computer explained that the Avalon would arrive at turn 2 in 90 years, meaning it was only 30 years since it left Earth. It shocked Jim, and he realized that he had woken up too early, and worse, he was the only one to wake up from the hibernation pod. He then went to the communications counter to send a message to Earth about his situation. After recording the news, he was notified that his message would reach Earth in 19 years, and he would have to wait 55 years for a reply. Apart from waiting a long time, he was also charged $6,000 just for a message. The messaging service was indeed costly because it uses laser technology. It meant that the Avalon traveled to the planet at approximately half the speed of light. After that, Jim continued walking around, and he was surprised that someone other than him was in a bar, which turned out to be not a human but an android barman for a company named Arthur. Jim started chatting with Arthur, who was quite reliable as a conversation partner. The next day, Jim went to a cafeteria and tried to order a drink. Still, he couldn't choose freely because Jim was a lower-class passenger, so he could only order according to his class. Jim Preston was a technician or mechanical engineer. He immediately looked for a module on hibernation capsules. After studying the manual, he directly operated it and made the capsule reignite. However, his efforts failed, though he lit the capsule. It still could not function. Then Jim returned to the navigation room and tried to damage the door in various ways, but his efforts were in vain because the door was so strong and not easy to destroy. Meanwhile, the computer system detected new damage due to the previous impact, but the computer system was able to overcome it for the time being. Frustrated because he was alone, Jim began to complain and vent to Arthur. He said he would go crazy if he had to be alone all his life. Arthur then gave a bit of advice for Jim to stop worrying and enjoy life as much as possible. Something that Jim had never thought of before. After hearing the advice from Arthur, Jim forced open a luxury room and moved there. In addition, he also had fun and enjoyed all the entertainment on the plane. After all this time of entertaining himself, Jim still felt lonely. He complained again to Arthur that he once refused to give him a drink because he had spent 1436 glasses just for Jim alone. Then Jim entered a room where there was a spacesuit that was used to travel outside. Jim tried it on, and out there he felt even more profoundly lonely and so desperate that he thought of committing suicide by throwing himself into space. But because he still had common sense, Jim canceled his intention until he noticed Aurora Lane, a beautiful young woman inside a pod. Jim began to look for information on Aurora. After seeing Aurora's profile, Jim was increasingly attracted to her. He began to fantasize that if he woke up, he would not feel lonely. Then he considered reviving her for companionship, but struggles doing so, knowing it was morally wrong and would circumvent her intended life on their destination planet. After going back and forth to Arthur whether he would wake her, Jim finally decided to wake her. Jim began to shave his beard because he would meet his woman. Armed with his mechanical skills, he passed the capsule and woke Aurora. Before Aurora was fully aware, Jim rushed back to his room. After a long time, Jim came out and met Aurora. Aurora, who was confused, asked Jim why no one was there while pretending to be stupid. Jim told her he was the only one who woke up and was now with Aurora. He took Aurora to the observation room, and the journey still has 89 years left, which meant that Jim has been alone for 1 year since he woke up. Still in shock, Aurora tried to find a way to be restored. Jim told her he'd done everything he could and needed special equipment to hibernate again. He also asked the information center, who told him the capsule couldn't be damaged. Aurora decided to rest in her room because she didn't get his desired answer. Jim went to see Arthur so as not to divulge the secret that he had woken Aurora up after introducing Aurora to Arthur. Meanwhile, the computer system detected that the damage on the plane was widening. Still, there was no sign of a notification signal. It turned out that Aurora was an upper-class passenger who could buy a delicious breakfast with Jim, a lower-class passenger, and could only buy a simple menu because of pity. Aurora also gave Jim the same breakfast as hers. Aurora was a writer and journalist. She began to record everything she experienced in her diary, including her worries about spending the rest of her life on the plane. Aurora then came to Jim and asked him why he moved to Homestead Dew. Of course, he answered because he was tired of living on Earth and wanted to build everything from scratch. In addition, Jim was a worker the company favored, so he got the opportunity to go there. It was far different from Aurora's goal. According to her, life was an adventure. It turned out that Aurora had bought a return ticket where, after reaching the planet, she would stay there for 1 year and then return to Earth, which meant that it would be approximately 250 years when she arrived on Earth. To get rid of boredom, Jim began to invite Aurora to enjoy all the entertainment on the plane, and to attract Aurora's attention further, Jim also gave Aurora a miniature Chrysler building that he made himself. The reason for this was actually where, at that time, Jim and Aurora were formally introduced while eating together. Then Jim blurted out that he knew Aurora was from New York in the profile he read earlier. At that moment, Aurora told him that she missed the view of Kyle's Chrysler building. After feeling close enough and confident, Jim ventured to ask Aurora to dinner together. After finishing, Jim pursued Aurora to enjoy the view into space. He asked Aurora to wear his protective suit. After that, they immediately went out and wanted what was out there. When finished, they went back inside. Aurora was so happy, they felt in love. Aurora began to accept the reality she was experiencing and began to think about enjoying the rest of her life with Jim. Meanwhile, the Avalon ship approached a giant star called Arcturus. They immediately went to the observatory to see it. Arcturus is a massive red star, and it's not too far away, so it can be seen brightly on Earth. If you want to see this star at night, you can look in the northern or northwestern sky, and it will twinkle. In addition, Arcturus is moving closer to our solar system at a speed of 122 kilometers per second. Scientists estimate it will take about 4,000 years to reach our solar system. Still again, this was just an estimate or theory because something that would happen in the future was just a prediction. Today was exactly a year since Aurora woke up from its stand. They celebrated together. Arthur also congratulated and gave them drinks, saying that Aurora was lucky because Jim was a good guy. While jokingly, Aurora said that Jim was not a good guy, but the most important thing in their relationship was that they had no secrets. Arthur asked Jim if that was true, and Jim said yes. Jim then went to his room to get a ring he had made before and was about to propose to Aurora. Unexpectedly, Arthur had previously promised not to divulge his secret but instead told Aurora because he thought there was no need for secrets between them anymore. Arthur told her that Jim took months until he finally decided to wake Aurora up. Aurora also became surprised that Jim had deliberately woken her up. Because she was so shocked and furious, Aurora began to stay away from Jim. Her feelings were so crushed knowing this. However, Aurora had previously seen a book about capsule hibernation that she found in Jim's room. But at that time, she did not suspect at all. Because she was so upset, Aurora went to Jim, who was sleeping, and beat him mercilessly. The next day, the computer detected that the damage to the aircraft was getting worse, and there was a system failure. After the computer finished restarting, Jim received a video call from Aurora. Aurora said that if she was on Earth, their togetherness might never have happened because she never thought of seeing Jim or even having a heart for him. Everything that happened here was purely due to circumstances. Aurora admitted that she felt lonely, and Jim disconnects the call. Jim was so sorry to see Aurora so stressed and lonely that he decided to take a plant and plant it. After finishing, he ordered coffee at Arthur's place. What Jim did made Aurora, who saw it, become a little entertained. Suddenly, the aircraft became unstable and experienced a system error again. They were surprised by the presence of someone near the tree that Jim had planted. It turned out that he was the aircraft captain who also experienced hibernation failure. He was Gus Mancuso, a deck chief officer. Using Gus personnel code, they accessed the ship's bridge. They then went to the navigation room and saw that the aircraft was still on course. Since the computer had no damaged data, they had to check it manually. The captain also felt unwell because he had just woken up from hibernation. Then, they split up to collect damage data. At the same time, the captain went to the hibernation room to check their capsules. Jim, who had finished checking the damage, following the captain to the hibernation room. Gus told him that their capsule was damaged because the ship burned. Still, he also discovered that Aurora's capsule was open on purpose. He understood Jim's condition, but his actions were not justified. Aurora, who had finished collecting data, immediately gave it to the captain. She also reported Jim's actions, but the captain explained that he could not do much because it was beyond his authority. After that, they went for coffee at Arthur's place. There was an interesting fact here. It turned out that Avalon has undergone 5 interstellar journeys, and Gus was the captain, and during that time, there has never been this kind of damage. While taking his drink class, Gus' hands suddenly shook. Seeing that, they advised him to rest. Arriving at the room, suddenly Gus coughed and bled. It was caused by his capsule not opening correctly, which caused damage to his organs. Aurora could not sleep and decided to swim, but suddenly, the ship lost gravity, which caused her to be trapped in the water. But the computer system was able to make her usual again. After that incident, they gathered in the navigation room. At this time, the computer had finished analyzing the damage to the Avalon. The central system was damaged 2 years ago when the Avalon crashed into a giant asteroid. Then all the resources on board tried to back up but were overwhelmed. If they didn't find and fix it soon, the ship would eventually be destroyed, threatening thousands of lives. Suddenly, the captain collapsed, and they took him to the medical room. The computer diagnosed the captain with severe organ damage. His life was only a few hours away. Then, in the observatory room, the captain gave his ID badge and employee code to access crew-only areas to Jim and asked them to care for each other before he died. After that, they went to the main engine room and looked for the source of the damage. Finally, they found the reactor of the aircraft computer, which was damaged by the asteroid. As a technician, Jim believed there must be spare parts around the place. After finding it, he immediately replaced the damaged components with new ones, but unexpectedly, when the computer attempted to vent the reactor to extinguish a runaway plasma reaction, the exterior vent failed. They had to cool the reactor to function normally. Manually, it was done, but the ventilation valve still could not open. Inevitably, Jim had to open it from the outside using the manual controls in the vent tube. Then Jim cut a steel door to protect it from heat bursts. After getting there hours, Jim managed to open the valve, but had to hold it open. After that, he asked Aurora to pull the manual lever and not to worry about it. Although worried, Aurora did it anyway. Otherwise, the room would soon explode. Revealing her enduring feelings for him, Aurora admitted she was terrified of losing him and being left alone. Finally, the reactor returned to normal, and the plane entered the recovery model. The previous burst made Jim throw and float in space. Jim improvised a heat shield and survived the venting but was blasted out into space as his tether snaps and his damaged spacesuit begins losing oxygen. Aurora immediately rushed to help him and took him to the medical room. The computer detected that Jim was dead, but Aurora did not give up so quickly and told the computer to do defibrillation to beat his heart back. Her efforts were not in vain because Jim returned to life. After everything went normal, Aurora dressed Arthur, who had previously been damaged. In addition, Jim released the body of Captain Gus out of space as a form of last honor. Jim checked the healing machine that had revived him, which turned out to be a machine that could be used for hibernation. Jim called Aurora and asked her to return to hibernation. He also said there was nothing to worry about from her because he was used to being alone. But Aurora preferred to live with Jim. And finally, Jim gave Aurora a ring he had made before. Finally, the two of them lived happily together throughout the trip. 88 years had passed since the incident, and people were starting to wake up from hibernation. People were so surprised because the plane was overgrown with plants. They also discovered a huge tree with trailing vines, lush vegetation, flying birds, and a small cabin. Jim and Aurora also shared their story on the Avalon. So, what did you think of this movie? Leave it in the comments below, and if you liked the video, please like and subscribe for more movie recaps. See you in the next video.